Hello there, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barrett.
I'm Chaz Lechidello.
Very special program for you this week. It's 60 years to the day since President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed in Dallas. And we'll speak to a reporter who covered the biggest story of his generation.
We're also going to cover the biggest stories of this generation, or at least this week, which, to be honest, has been kind of quiet because of Thanksgiving. I'm going to stop talking myself out of this. But first...
It may not be that big, but it is pretty funny. Congressman George Santos has announced he will not be seeking re-election next year following the release of a damning Ethics Committee report. This bipartisan group of investigators
unanimously concluded that there was substantial evidence that Santos misused campaign funds, filed false reports with the Federal Election Commission, and violated federal ethics law.
But that's not the really good bit.
The committee uncovered thousands of dollars in campaign funds allegedly used on Botox, casinos, even OnlyFans for his viewing pleasure. All this spending while not even paying his own staff members.
The Republican congressman from New York is already facing almost 24 federal charges and may not even serve out his 2-year term in office, as moves are underway to expel him from the House of Representatives. Ethics Committee member David Joyce, who's also a Republican, summed up Santos this way.
Basically, the man's whole life is a lie.
And he's not kidding. Some of the already proven Santos lies include writing on a resume that he graduated from Baruch College in 2010 with a bachelor's degree in economics and finance. He never attended Baruch. Santos also said that he worked for high-powered Wall Street firm Citigroup and Goldman Sachs. They say they have no record of Santos ever having worked there. And Santos claimed that his mother was inside one of the World Trade Center towers when they were attacked on September 11th, 2001. Immigration records indicate that Santos's mother was not in the United States on that day, Chaz.
And that is all just scratching the surface,
oh,
John.
Yeah.
Santos also said they founded an animal charity called Friends of Pets United, which he accepted checks for, but then he apparently just cashed them out under his pseudonym Anthony DeVolder. He said his grandparents survived the Holocaust, which is technically true, I guess, but they survived it over in Brazil. He used his pseudonym Anthony DeVolder to edit Wikipedia to suggest that he landed a role in Hannah Montana, and he also claimed to have produced Broadway musical Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark at the time when he was supposedly at uni. Oh, and by the way, as far as that OnlyFans go, that's the site which Santos spent donor money on to view adult entertainment. According to him, last year he didn't even know about it.
You know, I'll indulge you this. I just discovered what OnlyFans was about 3 weeks ago when it was brought up in a discussion in my office.
What do you think?
And I was oblivious to the whole concept.
He knows all about it now, though.
He sure, well, he knew about it then as well. The House Ethics Report suggested that even back then, he was pretty far from oblivious to OnlyFans, actually quite enthusiastic about OnlyFans. The question is, what happens now? If all the Democrats vote to boot Santos out, then they need 80 Republicans to join them for the requisite 2/3 of Congress to expel him from the House. Already, around 60 Republicans have told Politico they plan to vote for his removal. So sadly, the laughs might end soon, John.
Very, very tragic. But in seriously tragic news, it's worth noting today that it is 60 years since the world was stunned by the assassination of American President John F. Kennedy. The youthful, glamorous Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline brought Hollywood style and Hollywood friends to Washington, D.C. JFK's presidency suffered an early setback with support for the failed Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba in 1961, but he rose to the moment during the Cuban Missile Crisis the following year, staring down the Soviet Union as the world came to the brink of nuclear war.
I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace.
The events surrounding the assassination of JFK have been examined in minute detail, yet some still question whether his killer Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. But beyond the assassination and the theories, there is certainly a lot more to the story. It's Friday, November the 22nd, 1963. President John F. Kennedy is in Texas, midway through a 2-day, 5-city tour. America's 35th president and his running mate, former Texas Senator Lyndon Johnson, barely won the state in 1960 and Texas looms as an important part of Kennedy's re-election bid in 1964.
The great western city.
There's widespread speculation, though, that Johnson may be dumped from the ticket before then. LBJ is treated with contempt by some in Kennedy's inner circle, including Attorney General Robert Kennedy, who's already being seen as JFK's likely successor instead of Johnson. The President and Mrs. Kennedy are due to spend the next 2 nights as guests of Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson at their ranch outside of Austin, Texas. Kennedy doesn't know it, but LBJ plans to tell him over the weekend that he doesn't want to be on the Democratic ticket again in 1964. Johnson's long-held presidential ambitions seem to be at an end. November 22nd begins with a breakfast event at the Hotel Texas Ballroom in Fort Worth. Meanwhile, a headline in the Dallas Morning News reads, "Nixon predicts JFK may drop Johnson." Kennedy's former presidential rival Richard Nixon quoted as saying, "Lyndon Johnson has become a political liability." Delivering what would be his final public remarks, Kennedy expresses his hopes for a peaceful resolution to the Cold War with the Soviet Union.
This is a very dangerous and uncertain world. We would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it. The balance of power is still on the side of freedom. We are still the keystone and the arch of freedom, and I think we will continue to do as we have done in our past, our duty.
Air Force One leaves Fort Worth for the short flight to Dallas, arriving at 11:37 a.m.
As Mrs. Kennedy and the President of the United States.
President and Mrs. Kennedy greet well-wishers before joining a motorcade to the Trade Mart, where Kennedy is due to deliver another speech. He never arrives. At around 12:30, President Kennedy is fatally shot in the head and neck. Last rites are administered and the 46-year-old is pronounced dead at Parkland Hospital at 1 p.m.
The President of the United States is dead.
Kennedy's body is returned to Air Force One at Love Field, and it is there at 2:38 p.m. that Lyndon Johnson is sworn in as America's 36th president. Just hours after abandoning all hope of ever holding the office. Back in 1963, Darwin Payne was a reporter with the Dallas Times-Herald newspaper. He was covering the Kennedys' visit, but was unsure what the news angle would be, maybe just what outfit Jackie Kennedy was wearing. But he was also aware there was the possibility of protests, even violence, involving local far-right groups. A month earlier, Kennedy's UN ambassador, Adlai Stevenson, had been jostled and hit with a sign while trying to give a speech in Dallas. On the 22nd of November, Darwin Payne was in the Times-Herald newsroom when police radio gave the first clue that something serious had just happened.
Well, I was on the rewrite desk at the Dallas Times-Herald, the afternoon newspaper, and we were afraid things might go awry, actually, because there had been problems before with demonstrations against John Kennedy and Adlai Stevenson. So we had reporters stationed throughout that motorcade route who were giving us progress reports, and they're listening to the city editor reporting what was coming from the police radio dispatcher. He said, they're sending homicide and ambulance code 3 to Dealey Plaza, and he's been hit. Shots have been fired. And at that point, I was able to give up my story on Jackie Kennedy. And the city editor asked me, or demanded, that I run to Dealey Plaza and see what's happening there.
So you were then sent by your editor straight down to Dealey Plaza, where the assassination had taken place minutes earlier. You're talking to witnesses there. How did you come to talk to Abe Zapruder, who took that famous film of the assassination itself? How did that happen?
Well, I got there. He was in the building. Well, he shot the film from a high position right there at Dealey Plaza. And I was led to him by 3 or maybe 4 women who worked in his office. He was a co-owner of a dressmaking firm. They told me, as I asked him what they had seen, said, our boss got moving pictures of it. And I said, my gosh, where is he? And they said, well, we're going back to work right now. We'll take you. And so they took me to his place right across the street from the school book depository. And he had not come into the office yet, but on the TV was Walter Cronkite giving live reports that he was getting from his correspondents. And Kennedy has been shot. He's seriously wounded, but not fatally at that point.
The rumor that has reached them at the hotel that the president is dead. Totally unconfirmed, apparently, as yet.
For the next 45 minutes, I was with him, and he was getting irritated at Cronkite, the broadcaster, who was being very careful about not overplaying the situation and declaring Kennedy dead. But the photographer, Altshuler, was saying, no, he's dead. I know he's dead. I saw his head explode like a firecracker. And so he was very upset about the slowness of the news. He was a great Kennedy supporter. He was in tears much of the time.
So, Darwin, in those minutes, as you were sitting talking with the photographer, Abraham Zapruder, also watching Walter Cronkite on the television, you were one of the few people in America who also knew that President Kennedy could not have possibly survived because of what Zapruder had seen through the viewfinder of his camera.
That's right. I figured he had to be right, having seen something like that.
So you try unsuccessfully to have Zapruder give you his camera to get the film developed. Instead, the FBI take it. You then get sent straight to the boarding house where Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald, the prime suspect, has been living. What did you learn about Oswald there?
Oh, I learned a lot about him there. These people didn't know his real name. They knew him by O.H. Lee because he had given that name when he took the room over about 8 weeks before. And they described one by one, those that I got to, including the owners of the rooming house, that Oswald was a loner, a very lonely person. He had no friends. He didn't make friends there at the rooming house in the 8 weeks that he had been there. And no one ever visited him occasionally. And he would be speaking in a foreign language, either German or Russian. So, of course, that would have been Russian that he was speaking to his wife, Marina, trying to bring her back together with him because that was what he was eager to do.
So that fact that Lee Harvey Oswald was a self-avowed Marxist who had briefly defected to live in the Soviet Union, who had a Russian wife, he spoke Russian, that has fueled a lot of speculation since, of course, that he was working for the Russians or maybe for the Cubans or maybe for the mafia. Lots of theories have been out there. From what you know, and it's a lot, is there anything to this assassination other than the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, which was the official finding of the Warren Commission report?
No, I didn't. Everything I learned about Oswald, not just on that evening, but in the future, and I tried to study and stay abreast of what new evidence was coming out, including the Warren Commission report and all 26 volumes of the Warren Commission report, which I went through during those years. It was very revealing. And almost the Warren Commission, as begrudged as people have felt against it, covered everything very thoroughly.
So Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine, he had training in sharpshooting. He'd gotten himself a job in the Texas School Depository, we now know, so that he would have the opportunity to shoot President Kennedy, which he did. Hours later, you are one of the few people taken by police into the book depository to the 6th floor. What did you see there?
Well, there are a number of reporters who were waiting outside the building. They took us into the building, one detective did. They took us up floor by floor, 6 floors to the 6th floor, and led us to the window at the corner where the boxes had been stacked enough to conceal his presence. So that if anybody came up on that floor and just sort of glanced around, they would not have been able to see him. But he had his rifle there and fired the shots from there, and we all took turns looking out the window. We could see Elm Street, the street that wound around the school book depository. We could see about where the shots had landed or approximated. And you could see that the shot didn't look too difficult, really. And there were 3 shells there, the hulls of the bullets that had been shot. And then we were taken out back and led out and they showed us where the rifle had been tossed under a pallet of book boxes. And then we went down to the ground floor, and then we heard, of course, that he had been arrested.
Former Dallas newsman Darwin Payne, one of the last surviving witnesses to many of the events of November 22nd, 1963. It was on that Friday afternoon that Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested, initially over the shooting death of police patrolman J.D. Tippett. On the Sunday morning, while in police custody, Oswald was shot by nightclub owner Jack Ruby, and he died 2 days later. Ruby claimed it was an act of patriotic revenge. He too was found to have acted alone by the Warren Commission.
Well, if you enjoy conspiracies, John, then you're in luck, because we're about to enter a golden age of that kind of thing. This week, House Speaker Mike Johnson announced that he was honouring a promise he'd made to Republicans and was releasing 44,000 hours of footage from the January 6th riots to the public. And look, the added transparency, that's great. But it took less than a day for the first wild conspiracy to emerge from that footage. According to MAGA rabble-rouser Benny Johnson, that pic there showed an undercover federal agent with a badge disguised as a Trump supporter inside the Capitol on January 6th, proving that January 6th was a Fed setup and that all January 6th protesters should be released on grounds of entrapment. Massive get, Benny. Before long, congressional Republicans were jumping on it as well. Senator Mike Lee tweeted, "I can't wait to ask FBI Director Christopher Wray about this at our next oversight hearing." Neither can I, Mike, because as Community Notes pointed out, that supposed undercover agent was not a police officer. In fact, he's currently serving 51 months in prison for what he did that day, and he's not holding a badge, he's holding a vape. If you're not convinced, then that's the vape right there. So much for that theory. Marjorie Taylor Greene also posted about it, but unlike Mike Lee, she changed her post when it became embarrassing. Anyway, the good news for Marjorie is that there's going to be plenty more where that came from, but unfortunately, the real good stuff, it got deleted. Like this January 6 footage of Marjorie Taylor Greene arguing to protesters that Nancy Pelosi committed a crime for which she could be put to death.
She's a traitor to our country. She's guilty of treason. Exactly. And by our law, representatives and senators can be kicked out and no longer serve in our government. And it's a crime punishable by death, is what treason is. Nancy Pelosi is guilty of treason, and we want her out of our government.
I wonder why Marjorie tried to delete that for. After all, unlike her conspiracies, that did actually happen.
A case of careful what you wish for when it comes to all that footage, Chaz. President Biden, already the oldest man ever to serve in the White House, got even older this week, marking his 81st birthday on Monday. The White House says the president plans to celebrate in low-key fashion, with the Biden family also gathering this week for Thanksgiving.
Certainly we'll do that with coconut cake, which is something that they traditionally do.
Riveting stuff. 81's not young, John, but Biden might have finally worked out how to deal with concerns about his age by leaning into them.
It's not too much to ask. You okay? I want the press to know that wasn't me.
I particularly liked at the end there, Biden doing an impression of Trump's impression of him. I reckon a little bit more self-mockery and a little bit less cranky old man would serve him well.
Yeah, it's the Reagan playbook, a little bit of self-deprecation. The president did get a bit of an early birthday present this week. Reports suggest that Special Counsel Robert Hur, who's investigating Biden's handling of classified documents as senator and vice president, isn't likely to bring a criminal case. With the Wall Street Journal reporting, though, that Hur is preparing a report that is expected to be sharply critical of how he, Biden, and his longtime aides handled the material. Hur was appointed back in January after the documents were discovered at Biden's Delaware home and at offices of the Penn Biden Center in Washington, D.C. But unlike former President Trump, who has already been charged with mishandling classified documents, there was no evidence that Biden tried to conceal the documents from investigators. He invited them in, or to have falsely claimed to have turned all of them over that he knew that he had, or shown them to a bunch of people after storing them in a toilet. But if these reports are right, it will provide Trump with another opportunity to claim harsher treatment.
He's already onto it, John.
Oh, of course he is.
He's posting in all caps that no charges will be filed in the much bigger than mine crooked Joe Biden documents case. We're living in a very corrupt country. Also in all caps, posting about selective prosecution. And look, he might be right, John. There is a double standard, at least in my view, between those who are wealthy and powerful and those who aren't. Let's take a case study, shall we? Asia Lavarello, a Defence Department employee. She took some classified documents back to a hotel room where she hosted a dinner party, and one of her co-workers saw those documents in her bedroom. Investigators later searched her house and found a notebook containing her handwritten notes from meetings at work, which contained classified facts and information. But rather than sending the notebook back to the embassy via a secure diplomatic pouch, Lavarello had it personally transported with her to Hawaii, and she kept it in an unsecured location for, wait for it, 2 weeks. So what happened to her? 3 months jail happened to her. Whereas by contrast, Trump, Biden and Mike Pence all got away with keeping classified documents in their houses for years. That is a huge double standard. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hang on, Trump didn't get away with anything. He's been indicted. That's the selective prosecution. No, it's not. Trump's been treated exactly like the other rich guys. As the very conservative-friendly outlet Daily Wire stated, and I'm quite surprised by this, so I'm going to quote them directly. One key difference between the cases was that Biden's team quickly cooperated with federal investigators, while Trump is accused of obstructing the federal criminal investigation into his handling of the documents. It's worth noting that the only charges Trump was hit with in the investigation stemmed from the documents that were recovered after he was served with a subpoena. So in other words, normal people can't mishandle classified documents at all, but powerful people can do whatever they want with classified documents until the federal government asks them to give the documents back. And at that point, you better play ball. Unfortunately for Trump, he might learn what standard applies to people like him and Biden and Pence the hard way.
That is certainly one takeaway. I'm no expert, but I'd be looking at Asia's co-worker who was going through her bedroom looking for notebooks. Are you on the spy?
Yeah, it's an interesting question about
Well,
that.
sus. Meanwhile, apart from his age, it is the economy that is dragging down Joe Biden's poll numbers at the moment. But the birthday boy may have a bit of good news on that front as well, Chaz.
Sure did. Some nice low inflation figures wrapped up in a nice little bow for Joe Biden. The inflation rate for last month was 0.04%. Now, that's just for the month. But you can see it's a lot lower than previous months. And as far as the annual rate of inflation goes, it's now down to 3.2%, which is getting towards pretty reasonable levels, I reckon. What about the core inflation rate, though? That's annual inflation minus food and energy. A lot of people care about that one. It's a bit higher than the others. It's only down to 4%, but it's still heading in the right direction. And it's also getting towards the region where Biden wants it to be. Importantly, inflation's getting low enough for Biden to receive his real birthday present, which is news reports like this.
This year, something to be thankful for, a feast that won't break the bank. The American Farm Bureau estimates the typical Thanksgiving meal will cost $61.17 this year, a 4.5% decline from last year's record high price tag. And the big bird at the center of it all is cheaper too, down 5.6% this year.
Now, admittedly, that dinner is still about 20% more expensive than it was 3 years ago, but news reports about prices going down, that's gold for Biden. Sure, there are only a select few items going down at the moment. Democrats are tweeting about these items here, for example. Nothing too special in that list, but if inflation keeps falling, there will be more on that list. And that's when Biden's economic approval might start turning around. In fact, it might have already begun. YouGov's tracking poll over the last month has shown a definite improvement, with 46% of Americans now approving of what Biden's doing on the economy. That's a 9-point swing upwards since September, to the point where Biden's almost above water on that question, 46 to 49. Now, do not get me wrong, his polling is still terrible. Just this week, an NBC poll showed Trump leading Biden for the first time ever in an NBC poll. But if the economy continues like this, then Biden will be hoping that this could be the beginning of something of a comeback for him.
Yeah, and he doesn't need to win the election this November, it's next November. But to me, the most important stat in all of that, $27 turkey. That is good eating value. Now it's time for...
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Yes, it is time we busted some malarkey, Chaz. What do you got for us?
California, John. Specifically, California Governor Gavin Newsom, who turned some heads with this tweet the other day about a city in Tennessee that has banned being gay in public.
What?
Newsom warned, this is just the beginning. Well, that sounds pretty hardcore. So to back up his claim, he linked to this article from the New Republic about how a new ordinance in this particular city essentially prohibits homosexuality in public. Rightio, what's going on here? Well, they're talking about Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where an ordinance just passed that outlawed indecent behaviour. And that includes indecent exposure, public indecency, lewd behaviour, nudity or sexual conduct. And they define all those terms in section 2171 of the City Code. Let's dig deeper, go to the City Code. And sexual conduct there was defined as, quote, acts of masturbation, homosexuality, sexual intercourse and more. So that is where the story comes from. Except, turns out that code is not a recent ordinance. It dates back to 1949, and it doesn't seem to have been doing anything since 1949. No one has any recollection of the anti-homosexuality code ever having been enforced. So when LGBTQ+ festival organisers sued the council so they could hold a gay pride parade, the council unanimously voted to eliminate the term homosexuality from the code. And the gay pride event went ahead untroubled. But that all happened a month ago. So why are we now seeing headlines like, it's illegal to be gay in this Tennessee city? I guess the internet never forgets, John, especially when there's a chance to stir up some outrage. So, next time you get all angry, it doesn't hurt to follow the links, just in case you're about to pass on some malarkey.
So much malarkey. We should also register this week, Chaz, the fact that former First Lady Rosalynn Carter died early this week at the age of 96. The wife of America's 39th President, Jimmy Carter, she was a champion of mental health and aged care. The two were married for an extraordinary 77 years. Rosalynn Carter was one of the first presidential wives to wield significant political influence. She was a lot more political than Jimmy ever was, by all accounts. She described herself as a feminist, another first, as well as a traditionalist, and she was certainly a trusted advisor to President Carter, even sitting in on some cabinet meetings, which was also a first. President Carter, who turned 99 last month, Chaz, he is the oldest ever former president of the United States.
Yeah, and I think that friend and foe alike could agree that the Carters are two of the good ones, John.
Good people. Not a great president, good people,
Good
for
people.
sure.
Yeah. But look, tomorrow is Thanksgiving, the holiday where American families get together to fight about politics. So we thought we'd find out what some of America's political leaders are thankful for this year. Joe Biden is thankful for handrails. Anthony Blinken
Would you still refer to President Xi as a dictator?
is thankful the Biden-Xi summit is over. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen
Any place, any time, cowboy. Stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
is thankful for remembering to take off his wedding ring before fighting. George Santos is thankful for being the first congressman to walk on the moon after single-handedly winning 6 Super Bowls. Laura Boebert is thankful for her Denver theatre season pass. Donald Trump
This is the greatest witch hunt. He was with 4 hookers. You think that was good that night to go up and tell my wife, it's not true, darling, I love you very much? That one she didn't believe because she said he's a germaphobe. He's not into golden showers, as they say.
is thankful for Melania's love and support. And Mitch McConnell didn't get back to us before the deadline. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
And that is it for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you right here at the same time next week. And happy Thanksgiving from me as well to our American viewers.
We're going to Fireside Chat on Friday night on ABC News, and you'll find both shows on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook.
Good
See you
night.
later.